for you to be here today. We have an event called Competences and Knowledge, China's New Challenges to the US. My name is Romeo Orlandi. I will be the moderator today. And I have with me Oriana Skylar Mastro, political scientist, University of Stanford. Ivan Cardillo, president of Institute of Chinese Law. And Jacopo Marzano, political analyst with the magazine Formiche. The title, the subject is very engaging. We will do our best to make it as comfortable as possible. The challenge, the supposed to be challenge from China to the US, it's a hot topic with politics, economy, and intellectual circles. If it is a threat, a menace, or a hope of cooperation, still we don't know, but this is a serious subject. Can you please be silent over there? Please, thank you. We are going to discuss the topic. The method will be a round table. After my short introduction, I will let the guests to talk. And at the end of the session, after the two questions I will ask them, you will have ample time for your questions. So, just to introduce few words and few concepts. Is China a threat? The rise of China, is that so peaceful, like the Chinese government say, or it's a threat to the old international order? And if the answer is yes, which seems to be prevailing over this month of debate, the competence and the knowledge, do they play a crucial role? The economic and scientific development, do they go together well? Together? Is it something for which the US still keep the competitive edge, or the great leaps forward of China play such a significant role to overcome the difference, the gap between the two countries? Difficult questions. My personally answer is nobody knows. But we can at least ascertain how serious is the topic. Because that is a topic which involves our life, our security, our safety, and our future, mainly yours future. So, my time is over, thanks God. And Oriana, I'll leave it to you just to answer my first question as much as you can. Thank you.
In the posing of the question, it was said that nobody knows, and I would be remiss if I didn't come as the only American on this panel and project a great deal of confidence that I know everything. And I'm going to tell you exactly how we should think about China, or at the very least, how we think about it in the United States. I am here in Italy for the whole year. It is strange that all of us speak Italian on this panel, but we're speaking in English to you today. Let me just say that it's very important and very impressive as we talk about competencies and knowledge that all of you have decided to take the time to learn about geopolitics in these moments. I would say, and I'll get to it at the end, the number one problem in the United States right now is a disregard for knowledge and competencies overall. Is China a threat? China is definitely a threat to the United States. I work on military issues, and so I'm a bit biased in terms of the information and the news I'm exposed to. But China has spent the past 25 years specifically building a military designed to fight the United States. And the United States often asks, why would we be fighting? Why is it so important for you to be able to keep us at bay or keep us away? And there's a lot of indications that there are territories that China claims as its own, most famously Taiwan, South China Sea, East China Sea, that China believes might come to a point of conflict. And the number one thing that could prevent China from achieving its goals is the United States. And so over the past 25 to 30 years, as I started studying China, the military was kind of a joke. In the 90s, their pilots couldn't fly over water. Their ships had to be able to see the coast because they relied on systems within China to protect them. That's no longer the case. And I know later we'll talk more about technology, so I'll save some of my thoughts on technology for that point. But in Italy, and in particular, talking to European audiences, I think it's very important to highlight that there is no debate about this in the United States. China presents a very clear threat, not only in their rhetoric, the things that they say, and by they, I mean the government, but also their behavior in terms of the increased military activity in the region around Taiwan, and then also obviously the capabilities that are being built. The more difficult question is whether or not China presents a threat to Italy or to Europe. And here that's a bit harder, right? Because I wrote a whole book about how China builds and exercises power differently than the United States. And one of the big differences is the United States projects military power all over the world. The Chinese government has decided that that is an ineffective way of being a superpower. And while militarily they want to be dominant in Asia, they rely mainly on economic and political tools elsewhere. So the question for European countries is always, if there is no military threat, there's no threat that China is going to be attacking European countries, occupying European countries, is this really a debate, a discussion, a competition that you want to get involved in? And I'll just leave you with this final thought, which is to say that the Chinese government decided not to project military power into Europe, not because they don't care about controlling what European countries can do. It's because they have found a method that they think is more efficient. So the sovereignty of Europe is still at risk. You don't need foreign troops on the ground for your governments not to be able to do the things that are best for their people. And as long as a lot of European countries are in NATO, it's really hard for me to see a future in which the United States and China fight a war and Europe is not involved at all. And I'll save some questions about decoupling later, because I often say to my European friends, no one expects Europe to fight a war with the United States, but if anyone thinks that after there's one dead American, that any country within NATO will ever be able to trade with China ever again, you are crazy. So it will impact everyone economically, whether or not countries are involved militarily or not. So I start off on that very happy note, it's after lunch, so we got to get the discussion going. And
cheers. Good news. But anyway, thank you for your realistic and groundfold approach. Ivan, what is your opinion on that? Can you elaborate?
Thank you for the question. It's a real pleasure for me to be with you today, and it's also very nice to see this room filled with young minds and bright minds. I see everyone so interested and eager to see what we have to share. If we look at the European Union document about China, there are a couple of them. I would like just going to point out one: strategic outlook on China. And China is defined in three different ways by the European Commission: as a partner, as a competitor, and as a strategic rival. So we have a pretty complicated relationship for several reasons. One of the reasons is because we need to do diplomacy also with the United States, and we need to strike the right balance. I was thinking, and one of the words that came out in my mind was like competition. Like we need to, not a full competition, not a full cooperation. And from this perspective, it's important the way we structure, methodologically speaking, the dialogue. If we look at the comprehensive agreement on investment that was about to be signed by China and the European Union, the main problem at one point during the discussion is that the thematic and the object of that agreement became too broad and started to be involving democracy, human rights, and broader issue. So when you have a complex situation like this, then maybe we need to learn from the United States and from this administration, like not a deal, a deal approach, but a specific and very structured, theme or object of discussion. So trying to develop thematic dialogue on specific issues and try to balance all the interest within that specific topic. I don't know, let's say technology, green transitions, wherever, and try to find the right balance. Is China a threat? Definitely is a challenging for the way we have been living in the, let's say, since the foundation of the European Union that was funded somehow by the impulse also the United States. So the idea of a international consensus based on a certain idea of the West and the way the law and fundamental values could shape development, that was part of a law school in the United States called Law and Development that was created in the 60s. And after that, you had the American Association of Comparative Law, the American Journal of Comparative. The entire idea of comparing different laws around the world was based on this approach that law and fundamental values are two different things and that law is a tool for economic development. Now we saw like the way China grew in the last decades since Deng Xiaoping. So you have a strong development with a transplant of Western models when it comes to economic law or some specific institutions in the legal system that you find more often systems from the United States legal system than from the European one, for example. But that did not bring a shift in terms of value, but it created a different ways, the Chinese ways. So definitely it's a challenging time, and it's important also on one side to see how the ideological narrative, where that narrative is going, because it's not simple ideology, but it's definitely settling down a path. And on the other side, see, what supply chain, geoeconomics will say in terms of, disrupting of the chain of values. And so more and more, keeping a double approach on what is happening internally to one country and what is happening internationally, and see, how the balance should be kept, because tariffs and, sanctions, after all, will affect companies and employees, and in a democratic country, that is a strong leverage. For now, I just, stop here.
Jacopo, the floor is yours.
So good afternoon, everyone. Is China a threat? Well, let's think about scenarios. In our scenario, I think we are just entered in an era of comparison between systems, the democratic one and the autocratic one. We have two different policy decision-making We have two different way of thinking the industry, and nowadays, industrial security is national security, economic security is national security, information security is national security, and of course, military security is national security. So the interconnection between sectors and between every scenario of the autonomy, of the strategic autonomy of each state is interconnected with its development, technological development, military development, and so on. So today we are seeing a war on talents between China and the US. Let's make an example. The use of visa. If President Trump imposes tariff on visas, then China releases new free visas, like the new one, the K visas, for technological and scientific competences. We are just entered in a new era of geopolitical competition, of global geopolitical competition. We have had the nuclear race, then we had the space race. Now we are now focused on the artificial intelligence race, or the competence race, on the technology race. And why China could be or is a threat to the US, but not only to the US, also to Europe. Because China releases competitive open source system in the global south. And this system are powered by use. What does it mean? It means that every time we use a Chinese system, an open source Chinese system, we are going to make it stronger and stronger and stronger. And China will release it at very low cost to the very poor population and governments. And the system of China, the artificial intelligence systems, or the technological systems, or the messaging systems of China will get stronger and stronger and stronger, and will let China use its influence as an adaptive influence, weaponizing information, weaponizing data, weaponizing the economy, weaponizing industry, also due to the civil military fusion use of the industry. So we are now enter in a third era of global geopolitical competition, and this is now all focused on the development of competences.
Thank you. Second subject that we would like to touch, it is the so-called decoupling. Decoupling is a separation, disaccoppiamento, we would say, between something and something else. In this case, is the separation of China from the rest of globalization, and the globalization in most of cases is represented by the US. So the two economies are fully integrated, or at least over the last decades, they become very much integrated. Now, this integration, does it play in favor of China? Or, consequently, China is necessary to the supply chain of globalization? And if it is necessary, if China is necessary, decoupling, is it applicable, or it remains a slogan, just something to say, but with no possibility to implement? Or are they possible some countermeasures like small decoupling, for example, backshoring, bringing back to the US, in this case, previous investments in China, because they proved to be not good for the US, or friendly shoring rather than backshoring. So locate new investments in friendly countries, which cannot become enemies or hostiles like China could be or already is. Another possibility is to have nearshoring. So make new investment in a country near you, like Mexico for the US or Canada or South America, in order to control more than it has been done so far, the new investment. But China will allow that? Or is there anybody, any other country, which can replace China? Let me recall that China at the moment has around 33%, 1/3 of the industrial production all over the world, which means China has the same level of industrialization and supply of industrial products of Germany, Japan, and US together. So is it possible to replace China, or is it too late? Or is it possible that China use this industrial power as leverage in the competition with the US on Europe? Many question marks. Oriana, would you like to answer to this?
I will make some comments. As a military expert, I can't comment on the economic ratifications of some of these policies, but I want to highlight a few points. And I think this is important to understand the relationship between the United States and our allies. I have worked all over the world. I'm not what we call an alliance manager. So we separate people out based on their duties. I'm a China specialist, but because China is global, it has fallen upon all of us to talk to all of our allies and partners around the world. And sometimes, especially lately, and you can hear this a lot in Europe too, people are frustrated by US policy towards China. They think we are being overly aggressive with China, and that could potentially, provoke a conflict that was avoidable. Now, I have a whole separate project for those political scientists out there about the conception of provocation, which I just think is very interesting in and of itself. But there's one important point to highlight, which is if the globalization that China has been a key part of, if that disintegrates, we're going to be fine in the United States. The United States has a huge internal market. We are energy independent. The last I checked, only 2 to 3% of our GDP was based on trade with the rest of the world. It's the rest of the world that's going to have the hardest time. And so when allies and partners say, oh, United States, you're being too aggressive at avoiding this war, I like to highlight, we're also doing this for you. Because again, economically, we are much less reliant. Now, there's a separate note of comparative advantage. Are we all better off because of trade? Absolutely. And the comment that I just made might make you think that I'm for decoupling, which I am not, because I don't think it makes any strategic sense to do something for fear that that same thing might happen. That's what decoupling is. For fear that you might have to pay the costs of a reduced economic relationship with China, you seek a reduced economic relationship with China. Now, I still hope, and I think many people hope, that we would never reach the point where there's conflict between China and the United States. So you never reach the point where the economic interdependence between China and the United States is a bad thing instead of a good thing. But it doesn't make sense to me. If we do reach that point, why don't we pay all the costs then instead of paying them now? The biggest issue that I have with this debate in the United States is it's not about China, really, right? It's about domestic politics in the United States. Of course, there are certain things, I focus on military modernization, that the United States should not be reliant on China for, because we will not have access to those things in a time of conflict. But the most of the discussion is not about those things, right? It is about the overall relationship with China and how they benefit more than we do which is just not sort of factually the case. I'll also just say as a note that in my line of work, I'm very concerned about China launching a very quick, what they would consider a quick war to take Taiwan. But China is deterred from using force if they believe the war would be long. And that's primarily because of the economic costs. If China is completely economically independent, then that deterrent goes away. And so I do think the economic relationship, while it's not perfect, it can't solve all problems, does create incentives towards peace. And that should be the focus. And in the meantime, of course, supply chains in terms of defense industrial production need to be secure. But it doesn't mean that I testified for Congress in March, and a senator said to me very directly, because he was for decoupling, and he said, you know, Professor Mastro, do you buy anything from China? Now, I did not answer the question directly. I have 2 little boys at home. Everything I buy is from China because they are going to break it immediately or lose it immediately. So it doesn't make any sense to pay anything more for it. But for now, at least, I think that this question of decoupling is much more about the competition and the feeling in the United States that China has not been playing fairly in any realm, and not even in the economic realm that's supposed to be more win-win, and that is spilling over into the military realm. People think the military competition spills into the economic, but it's actually the other way around.
Yeah, thank you. And on one side, I believe the coupling is not something that we want. All nations, they have they have common goals, common interests, especially when it comes to environmental protection, and also the pandemic showed how, you know, we have to be, you know, talking to each other and working together. So decoupling for certain things is just not possible. We witnessed it a few days ago, China renouncing to the status of developing country within the World Trade Organization, and that status does give a certain kind of benefits also in terms of polluting. There is an entire economy growing around the concept of carbon credit, and so there is just not possible. Otherwise, we will just be fighting for clean air at one point. On the other side, when it comes to technology, so let's say, okay, knowledge, okay, competence and knowledge. How we define knowledge today? So we need scientific research, fundings for scientific research. We need talents, human capital, but then we also need the infrastructure to be able to do research, and we also need legal standards, you know, governance of data, security standards. And when it comes to this, is Europe able to manage all of this? Is able to do all this, cover all these 4 areas on its own? A recent study of Cornell University showed how, for example, on AI and semiconductor, the partnership between Chinese scholars and American scholars has been extremely important for the development of the science for the 2 countries. And most of the scholars have Asian ancestors, and most of the American scholars going back to China, moving to China for doing research, is have connection with Chinese people, and the other way around. So basically, we have a community of scientists and experts talking to each other. On the other side, the research and development in China, especially scientific and technology development in China, was planned since 1993 with a special law on that. And everything has been made towards that goal. And of course, when you mention like technology, research and development, it includes everything, all kinds of technology, all those ones that benefits more to the people, to the other ones who are more military sensitive. Still, again, a few days ago, the Nobel Prize were awarded, and for the economy, the three scientists who received the Nobel Prize, they discussed how innovation can become a sustained economic growth, how innovation can support economic development. And again, if we think about countries not playing fairly, it's more about subsidies, right? And the way the state support companies. We have, and here we have another issue. When subsidies are considered to be good for the society, that's when, according to the Nobel Prizes, that's when those subsidies will support research for companies in those fields where technology can become quickly obsolete or can be outcompeted quickly. So in those cases, companies are not really interested in doing research and innovation, R&D investment, and that turns out to be a damage for the society. On the other side, subsidies are bad when they are only used by companies just for their own profits and not creating a real innovation. This might ring a bell about what's happening with the EVs and the new electric engines around the world, which is all exactly about this. Again, I don't really see how Europe can fit in a decoupled world. Stopping cooperation in terms of technology will turn to be more expensive for all citizens because you need to have double standards, you need to have double investments, you need to, it's just not cost effective. And Europe at the moment can only play the card of being the regulator superpower and try to, with some strategic partnership, because at one point you can impose your regulations and your standards only when are carried by demand and the sales of your technology, because at one point technology should work and they are built within certain standards, and so they carry those standards with them. I see, when I think about the coupling, I see, I'm worrying a lot. Also, next point, there is that of small yard and high walls. So you pick up a very specific sector and then you just lock it from any possible outside influence. I think that it's important to understand really the full impact for Europe, especially for Europe, about what decoupling might lead to. And what I can see that is happening, it's more like a developing of a different regional partnership, the Quad or the BRICS, the enlarging of the BRICS, and more interest-based national treaties that somehow they use the deal approach, methodology, and that's how. So you need to have a political leverage. Again, when China stopped the import of soy, it's targeting Mr. Trump electorate in Ohio. So again, when you do the coupling, it is very damaging at the beginning, and it's really difficult to hold everything. Social, people's work, everything. And I just want to close with, with this final thought. I always think about an interview to Tim Cook when he says, why you produce Apple in China? And he says that he produces Apple in China because that's the place where he can find enough engineer to build the iPhones that he can sell everywhere in the world. It was like, if in the Silicon Valley, I go and look up for engineers able to build an iPhone, I can only fill up a meeting room. In China, I fill up a different stadium. So that's all about, again, competence heard of here today. And again, to build up those competences, it is extremely difficult, and it takes time. It takes decades. Yeah.
And apparently it involves the size of the stadiums you want to fill. Jacopo, last but not least.
Thank you so much. Professor Oriana Scaramasso talks about paying the cost. Well, as an Italian and European citizen, I don't want to pay the cost of a decoupling economy, world economy. I really don't want it. And I will explain why. Today, China is promoting itself as an alternative global partner for the global South, but generally speaking, for the world. And it is doing this through various initiatives, like the Global Development Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, the Global Civilization Initiative, the Belt and Road Initiative, and the Global Artificial Intelligence Initiative. In all of these initiatives, there are competences, knowledge, science, and technology. Technology today is a global passepartout, and it is the main sector of development and research. And it is a passepartout that open every gate for China to enter at a lower cost in terms of influence, in terms of geopolitical alliances, and it's all about alliances. China presents itself as a partner, as a cheaper partner, as a fair partner, as an honest partner. And in the Xi Jinping's words during the last BRICS summit, he says, we have a vision, a global vision for the world, and we introduce you a global cooperation, win-win cooperation. Everyone win. And the three pillars of this cooperation will be peace, stability, and progress. Well, they are spreading this kind of vision, this kind of challenge for being the first superpower in the international system, spreading technology at a lower cost, and presenting itself as a good, fair, and cheaper technology and policy maker. China produces 3.5 million STEM graduates per year, and that's a huge number of STEM graduates. And again, this is a war on talents, a war on knowledge, and a competence war, a competence challenge to the US. Why? This is because for China, sitting at the table of global artificial intelligence regulators means another Yalta conference or another Potsdam conference. There will be a conference for the global regulators of the artificial intelligence and the technology of tomorrow. And this will give China the prestige of a great power. And this will give China an international legitimacy and the legitimacy to challenge all over the world, US as a main technological, ideological, military, and security partner.
Thank you. Before we start the question time, I have a question, and I have a question for you, Oriana, just to break the ice of a Q&A session. How would you rate the rise of China in military capability? For many years, I lived in China. I was under the impression that, like you mentioned before, the military capability was not that efficient or was not so high. Also due to the fact that the military always refer and take orders from the politicians. The achievements they reach, is it serious? Is it effective? Is it blatant? Or still they are lagging behind?
So I think the answer to that question is yes. The Chinese military is a significant force, by far the most advanced world, United States. For those in Europe in particular who are worried about Russia, Russia is a joke compared to what the Chinese can do. When Russia first invaded Ukraine, and I was the Chinese writings, the Chinese just assessed, how bad the Russians were. They didn't have enough munitions. China has more munitions than all of us put together. Poor planning, poor execution. So China is not a paper tiger in that respect. The Chinese have the capacity to, we say, hold the United States at risk, meaning that the United States and Asia, in particular, are bases in Japan and the Philippines, Korea, are not survivable if China decided it wanted to attack them. And anything that is flying or sailing within 300 miles or so of China can take out immediately. So this puts the United States at a huge disadvantage. That being said, the Chinese military is nowhere as good as the US military. The problem is it doesn't matter, because the way the Chinese have thought about it is that we are preparing for two very different wars. If the United States had to fight a war against China, we would have to project power for over thousands and thousands of miles. We are reliant on space, for example, for all of our capabilities, for navigation, precision, timing. It's like the United States, we only have a cell phone, but China has a landline and a cell phone. So even though they also are getting more space assets, for the most part, they are fighting the war from China. And any weapon that is land-based is more powerful than something in the air or on water, just because you don't have limitations in size, right? A radar to track aircraft on land is bigger than one that you have on a ship. They know everything that I say, so we're okay. So the point is, it doesn't matter that the United States is better. I'll give you one last example before I switch. In any simulation, if you were to have Chinese aircraft and US aircraft fighting, the United States would shoot down 10 Chinese airplanes for every one they shot down of ours. The Chinese didn't look at that and think we need better airplanes, we need better pilots. They developed the capability to put a hole in the one runway that the United States has access to so that we can't take off. China has 39 air bases within the vicinity of Taiwan, and the United States has 1. So that's how China plans on fighting the United States, not by being better than the United States in everything, but really taking advantage of the fact that for the United States to win a war, we need to be able to do so much more than what China needs to do. And that's not only militarily, that's also diplomatically. Because what does China want from the world if they use force against Taiwan? They want the world to do nothing, right? So China might come to Italy and say, can you do nothing, please? That's a lot easier than what the United States is going to ask of you, right? So even in the diplomatic realm, what the United States needs to succeed is so much more and so much harder than what China needs.
Thank you. Now the floor is yours. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so say your name, go quick to the question, please. No, you were first, and then you were second, and you're third. So you.
Hello, thank you so much for your speeches. I have two kind of related quick questions. One is on the supply chains between China and the US. How will the US-China competition in critical raw material supply chains will take shape in the near future, in your opinion, as US signed an act with Ukraine? Mining, and Serbia recently made a 8 billion euro investment in the Serbian mining system. And my second related question is on the recent Chinese cyber attacks in Europe. And with that, how will their fast investment in quantum cryptology, in your opinion, will be changing the approachment of US in cybersecurity and cyber defense? Thank you.
Do you want to take more than one question at a time? One by one?
So the logic of weaponization of supply chains and critical raw materials and hybrid warfare is the same logic. Let's make an example. We have had Galaxy, DeepSeek, and Cell Typhoon, the three different ways of influencing, of adaptive influence and hacking and hybrid warfare by China in Europe and in the USA. Due to the New York Times, almost every American citizen have had the spyware Cell Typhoon from China for 12 months or something more. And this allowed China to extrapolate a big amount of data. Data today is power. Information is power. And let's say that the line red that keeps together your question is one, that today to attack is cheaper than to defend. We can attack, one man can attack an entire state with one click, and it's so cheap. And to defend cost so much money. Let's make another example. Let's talk by examples and by concrete scenarios. Drones, micro incursion by Russia in Europe, and our planes and MiG are on air with a higher cost than attacking. To attack is so cheap. Information is weaponized. The economy is weaponized. Critical raw materials are weaponized. We are in an era of weaponization of almost everything. And we need to defend ourselves and our democratic values by act of sensibilization, by talk, by communication, and also by recognizing who are our allies, which are our principles, the cost of principles, and which cost we want to pay and how much we want to pay it.
Thank you. Number two.
Hello, my name is Mikhail, and I wanted to ask, so you mentioned on decoupling from China that economy will act as a deterrent from it because they will try to conquer Taiwan fastly. And I wanted to ask how it will look from the tactical perspective, because Taiwan is a very mountainous island, so just storming it while it's being resupplied in front isn't going to be very fast. And taking it into the blockade involves taking Okinawa and breaking the first island chain. So how, from the tactical perspective, Chinese will try to fastly conquer Taiwan? Thank you.
Okay, so the campaign is 2.5 to 3 weeks long. Before the main missile barrage, they flush out all their submarines. They put first wave 25 to 30,000 people on ships. Then they start with the joint missile campaign, which takes out all the defenses on the island. Then they start the way across. Now, I personally think they start moving the ships before the missile attack because they do so much military activity around Taiwan that they can get closer without a response because we will still not be sure that the time has come for a real attack. So the defenses on Taiwan will be taken care of. You mentioned how mountainous it is. As far as I know, Chinese military is the only military that every single service has an airborne component. Navy, Air Force, missiles. Every single one has a component in which they plan on dropping people from the sky inwards. So a big part of seizing all the airfields will happen through airdropping people. And then the first wave comes, and there are only a few beachheads there. But if there's no defenses, it's kind of like Normandy. If the Germans weren't there, it wouldn't have been so hard to land, right? So the Taiwans won't have any defenses. They'll be very minimal. So it doesn't take very long to get across the strait. The United States, we cannot respond that quickly. So they land, and the Chinese hope is by the time PLA troops get on the ground, the government of Taiwan will capitulate. Part of those missile attacks are to take out the command and control between the Taiwan government and the military. There is only 160,000 members of the Taiwan military. Most of them are trained for urban warfare, which is not really relevant in this context of air and sea. And then once the government capitulates, then it's basically over. I think the hard thing is, and what the United States is trying to do, is if it's difficult to take out Taiwan's defenses so that they have an easier time taking it longer for China to come, that gives the United States time to respond. So there's the threat of US intervention if Taiwan can hold out. But even their own assessments by their own defense ministry would say they could probably last 7 to 14 days, and that's it. So that's the quick scenario. The worst case is if the Chinese think they can execute that, but something unexpected happens that delays them. Maybe their own forces. The number one reason they haven't done this is it's a very complicated operation that requires all the services to work together. Let's just say that becomes difficult and they don't execute it correctly. It becomes and then the United States has time to intervene. Then we're in a multi-year war, which nobody wants. And so the best thing is for either the Chinese to be correct that they can do this quickly, or for them to not do it because they realize they can't. The worst case scenario is for China to think they can do it quickly, but they are wrong, right? Because then we are all involved. But that's what that looks like. That's the first wave. And then they have 2 more waves of about 30,000 each for a total of about 100,000 PLA on the island of Taiwan within 3.5 weeks.
Hello. I had a few notes that I've taken while they were speaking. Thank you for it. But unfortunately, my phone just died, so I'm going to have to briefly go through my mind. The first thing I remember is that I know you mentioned that you're not an expert in economics, but you set a 3% data on something, and I assume that you're referring to the Chinese trade with ratio to U.S. economy. And yes, it's about 2 to 3%. But it's not a surprising fact that there are reroutings because it's not, well, there were not really standard or common changes in policies when there were tariffs recently, but the US has been doing it for, we can say maybe around last decade. And it's a known thing that there are reroutings, and some researchers report a minimum of 68% trade only with China, let alone that US GDP is now maybe a quarter from international trades, which a few years ago was over 30%. So how can the US be so sure that while they empower their allies in Pacific and try to bring more and more obstacles into trades with China and expect everybody else in the global table to always keep on to the US side? Because pretty much we can see that some of the support they provide is also controversial because of some meetings we saw with Ukraine. There were grants, but there were almost, we can say, complaints that they were a sort of donation because they were supposed to be grants and they were supposed to be giving anyway. So my question is just simply, you were right about the energy independency of US, but we can say that Europe is much behind China, even if not now, if we're talking about near future. They have plans in a short time, we can say maybe 5 years, to double their nuclear energy solution. So how can US be so sure that they are going to be extremely stable about a crisis against China and keeping aside just the whole abuse of military power?
So to be clear, I was citing a statistic about the percentage of US GDP total that's reliant on foreign trade total, not with China. So a lot of economies, and I don't know the statistics for European economies, but it's my understanding that Europe is much more dependent, and I know China is very dependent on international trade as a key component of their GDP. The United States, I don't mean to suggest it's not a problem at all. We have this debate in the United States because it is a problem, but comparatively, you know, if everyone is worse off, we are not as bad as everyone else. Now, to your question of the economic costs, this is what I would say. How many people here have been to the United States before? Right? A lot? Okay, so you've had some exposure. You know, we have different cultures. We see things differently. And so many who have been to the United States will understand this distinction. Every country has to make a decision about how much sovereignty is important to you. Some countries let other countries, because they are weaker, what have you, determine their economic policy, their military policy, their foreign policy. There are some countries that don't even have militaries, and they are client states of someone else. Now, when I talk to allies and partners in the region, they will say, listen, yes, we are dependent on China. We are also dependent on the United States. We always have to ask ourselves, what will some other country think when we make decisions? And so even a country like Italy is making those calculations between your own sovereignty and how to deal with more powerful countries. Now, I don't know what you think about this, but at least the US view is, as far as powerful countries go, we're pretty nice. That if you're going to trade your sovereignty to be influenced by somebody, we're better than the alternatives. Now, not all countries feel that way. Many countries, especially in the developing world, autocratic countries, would much rather make that deal with China than with the United States. Why do I say all this? It is to highlight the fact that for Americans, that trade-off does not exist. No country tells us what to do, ever, about anything. The amount of patience or support we have for that is zero. You're talking about a population that when they were told to wear masks during COVID, they were like, I will kill somebody. Right? Americans are pretty extreme about freedom and sovereignty. So that discussion in the United States of, well, it will cost us something economically, and China might have all of our data, and maybe they'll tell us what to do every once in a while, but that's worth the trade-off. For us, that's worth fighting a war over. Now, I understand that's not the case in a lot of other countries, but at least as you are here learning about the US perspective, I think it's important to understand that we are all looking at the same trade-off in some ways, but in the American context, I once had some Chinese colleagues say to me about Taiwan, listen, we speak the same language, we have the same background. This is inevitable that they're going to be a part of us. Why would they fight a war against us instead of just accept China? And I responded, listen, we also were very close to another country. We spoke the same language. We had great economic ties. We had the same culture. But because of differences in political freedoms, the United States fought a war against Great Britain to be independent, right? So in the United States, and I'm not an America expert, but just in my experience, there's no amount that we are willing to sacrifice in sovereignty for the benefit of the economic relationship. And so that's what makes it hard when Americans deal with allies and partners, because we don't understand maybe that there's different viewpoints about that elsewhere.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
So, hello, my name is Usama, and I have a question. So, when you were talking about the military capacity of the Chinese government, you said that China in the last 20 years had developed an army that is capable of having a full war with the United States. So, and you're considering that as a threat to the United States. But at the same time, we see that the United States have a lot of military bases all across the Pacific Ocean, especially from South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Guam, which is we will be able to make a full blockade over the Chinese government, over the Popular Republic of China. Don't you think that the actions of the United States against China it may be the reason why China had started to prepare itself for a war against the United States, and also that the United States have been supporting Taiwan even before it was Taiwan, since it was like the Republic of China as an exiled government, not as base of the right of self-determination.
I mean, this is the very short answer to your question is yes. It is when people ask me how to avoid conflict, that's a very easy answer. You just give China everything it wants, and then we don't have to worry about it. The problem is, at least from the US perspective, the things that China wants goes against US interests. Now, to your point, the Chinese call it, I used to show this map when I said the Chinese would argue they are encircled by the United States. And then I show a map of all the military bases that are around China. Of course, China doesn't feel safe being surrounded by the US military, right? Our view is like, as long as you behave yourself, you're fine. But the Chinese are like, well, first of all, I don't know that's true, because historically declining powers get very aggressive to try to maintain their positions. And secondly, China has this view of deterrence that they want to be able to use force with no repercussions. And they want to deter intervention. Now, when my Chinese colleagues say to me a similar argument that you've made, listen, if the United States were not here, none of these problems would exist, right? This Taiwan problem wouldn't exist. This North Korea problem wouldn't exist. None of these problems would exist. And I don't disagree with them. That's true. If the United States did not have allies and did not back countries in Asia, those countries would have been bullied into doing what China wanted to do a long time ago. But I think the US position is that's not how decisions are supposed to be made. And I will just add to it that the conception of US security, and this is partially because of the world wars, is that while it seems like a good idea in the short term, because we don't want to be involved and we don't maybe want to fight these wars, to not be in a region, in the long term, if we are not there, bad things happen. And then the repercussions are worse than if we had stayed. Now, whether or not that's true is a separate issue, but I just tell you that's a part of the sort of strategic thinking in the United States, that what maintains peace in Asia, why there has not been a war over the past 70 plus years in Asia, is because our military is there. And I can tell you, as someone who reads Chinese military writings all the time, that is true. China has not used force this whole time because they're worried about what the United States would do. So this goes back to that provocation deterrence balance of at what point does the United States do too much to make China feel like there's no other option but to use force? So you have to get that balance perfectly. And, obviously based on your question, it seems like you might disagree with me on where that balance is. But it's an important thing to be looking out for. And I'll just finally say that I understand everything China's doing, but I'm not a China strategist. I'm an American strategist. So it's my job to protect US interests, not Chinese interests. But there's nothing like evil about China's plan. It makes perfect sense that as a rising country, they want territorial control over resources, and they want to be able to tell other countries what to do. That makes sense to me. But it's just it's not good for the United States, and I would argue for our allies and partners.
Hello, everyone. Okay, first of all, I wanted to thank all of you for your amazing speeches. I wanted to ask you for a comment on the recent trade war that the United States started, because we saw a really different response from the European states and China. They did actually like quite complete different responses. So I would like if you could comment on that. Also, I would want to ask, I know when we talk about the United States and China, and that Europe is in this scenario really a spectator to the relationship between USA and China. I don't see actually it possible in the recent years, but how could a European federation change the dynamics between the USA and China? Would they actually be maybe in favor of the USA? Would it be in favor of China? Would they act as a mediator? How would the dynamics change? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This is, I mean, the other word of today is diplomacy. So we are talking about war and conflicts. So diplomacy should be, it's very important and should play a very important role. And diplomacy works when you can talk to each other and you can play something. It's a dialogue. The art of negotiations. Try to find a common ground and build on that. Tariffs is exactly an example of the way of thinking about war is changing today. There are more tools, and we still need to see what will happen with the judgment in the United States if a tariffs can be understood as a sanction, so belongs to the power of the president. So there is something legal happening. Anyways, the supply chain is so global that when you try to block something, it's difficult. I mean, if you think about the rare earth, the way the first operation on the refining of the rare earth, China is controlling most of that process at the moment. So again, it has been a way of playing cards in terms of projecting power and expanding the interest, in other countries. So that, again, it's an effective tool, especially when it comes to democratic countries, against democratic countries, because then you have an electorate that is losing wealth, and you need to answer to that in terms and convince them, for example, about the goodness of your decision. I don't know if when you talk about Federation of Europe is like a strengthening of European Union from a legal perspective. Yeah. So the problem that we have with Europe now that there is the rule of unanimity in taking decision, and that made sense until Europe was more composed of, let's say, coherent countries. The rapid expansion of European Union made that unanimity rule just backfiring, because on one side it's not preserving a real common identity, on the other side is stopping a decision on critical issues. Having a unified response it's important, because the old saying of divide et impera is what is happening in Europe with the diplomacy with each member state. European Union doesn't really appear much on the Chinese radar as an entity to deal with. Also the way, diplomatically speaking, was treated the delegation in July in China, the 24th, the way it was reduced suddenly, and it doesn't look good, and I think Europe can have a stronger say if they united more, the single member states. If France really decide to put the nuclear weapon on the, for all the members, and if Germany really decide to carry on technology development for the entire union, and if a way to dealing with the east side of Europe it becomes more like integrated, let's put it like that. And still, again, we have the club of 4 countries, 5 countries: Italy, Germany, Spain, France. It's not that easy, because you need to have one strong army and a foreign voice, together. When a piece is missing there, it's tough. But on the other side, this multi-voice of Europe creates an interesting exercise in terms of reaching a one point that is more diversified and diversified understanding of the matters. And that's what might give to the European Union that boost to become a superpower in terms of regulations. Yeah.
Just a quick comment. You were talking about the Confederation of States for Europe. You know what? The first priority for a state is to survive. And nowadays, you need a strong voice to survive. There's a sentence in international relations that tells us, if not sitting at the table, then it means you're in the menu. So we are not sitting at the table because we have unanimity, and we have 23 different points of view. And we are not going to speak with one voice, and our 33 voices are against each other. So we are not sitting in the table, and we are definitely in the menu. The only thing we can do, as I said at the beginning of this meeting, is to think about the confrontation of system, autocracy and democracy. Autocracy acts, democracy deliberate, and debate. We need to be quicker, more efficient. We need to talk with one strong voice. Also, United States are more states, but are a confederation with a strong voice. We need a strong voice, we need a vision, and we need a policy that allow us to look forward, not in terms of 1, 2, 3 years, but 10, 15, 20 years, unless we will not sit at the table.
Sorry, before taking other questions, there are 20 people that have to go to another event that starts soon in another location. So they can go silently outside to the other event, but we can take other questions now. Okay, wait just a second. Yeah. Okay. Can we take other questions?
We have a couple of more questions. By 4, we are done. So one question is for the gentleman.
Hello, my name is Theodore. I'm from France. Thank you very much for your speech. I had a question related to Taiwan. If China took control of Taiwan and its semiconductor industry, will the United States be able to respond economically and technologically to maintain its industrial competitiveness in this sector?
So I'm not a technology expert, but I can tell you that my understanding is, first, the degree to which Taiwan semiconductors would still be available to the world I think would depend on US policy more than anything else. We discuss it a lot in the United States, but I don't really see a reason why in that scenario China would refuse to sell semiconductors. If anything, it is a very good tool to create a wedge between the United States and its allies. So the question is what sanctions would the United States put on China? And if it were the case that it cut off the interaction technologically, whether it is semiconductors or, this is one area where the Chinese have invested a lot, but have not made as much progress as in other areas. The United States is going to be at a serious disadvantage in that scenario. But I don't know. I often wonder when people ask me about the semiconductor industry and they say, oh, there can't be a war because Taiwan has the most advanced semiconductors. Does that just mean we have to use like our iPhone 15s for another year? Like, what does that really mean? In terms of competition, there's a better option, but it doesn't mean that we don't have semiconductors, right? We still have them and they're still, advanced. So the question sort of becomes, how bad is it to not be the one that has the most advanced chips that yours are? You haven't reached that kind of level. And China has been very successful economically this whole time, even as they have had an industry that has struggled significantly. So the question might be at that point, the United States has to make that trade-off, right, between the economics and the political. And maybe if Taiwan is already gone, we've lost that fight, then someone in the United States says, listen, we will be better positioned to win the next battle if we continue to trade in semiconductors with China as we try to build up our own industry. But it is hard to tell. Breakthroughs are called breakthroughs because at least from the outside, they happen very quickly and unexpectedly. So it's hard for me to predict like where the industry will be and where the United States will be in that industry, in 10 years' time.
Okay, we'll deliver a question. Okay.
Hi, thank you for your presentations. My name is Eliza. I'm from the US. I had a question about the US's future regarding China. I wanted to know if you see the US ever adopting any of the tools from your provocation strategy. Because since the beginning of history, the US has got involved in a lot of international conflicts and has kind of always had that need for territorial and complete control. So I was wondering if it's a possibility that we could maybe learn something from China, if we could learn to maintain control with less forceful and more efficient measures, maybe also using less resources and less funding and saving some of our national budget for other things besides military. Thank you.
I mean, so that's a great question. And the answer is yes. So I wrote this book that came out last year called Upstart, How China Became a Great Power, in which I talk about how they're much more strategic about their decisions about where to compete and what to do and what not to do. And that in the United States, we could learn a lot from that because the US response is always just to try to do everything without any understanding if we're really any good at those things to begin with, and whether or not they make a strategic difference. So some of the more controversial viewpoints for me is, for example, the push to build up the US nuclear arsenal, which just makes no sense and is extremely expensive, right? The United States spent more on its nuclear weapons than China spent on its whole military until 18 years ago. So that's just a huge waste. The war, the war in Afghanistan cost the equivalent of 10 Belt and Road initiatives. I will just leave you to decide which one you think would be more geopolitically impactful. And I say all this and I get nods, but let's bring it back home. Ukraine is strategically irrelevant. It is not important in any possible realm of importance, economic, political, military. It wasn't a US ally. Its economy is like 77th. The discussion about whether or not we should support more Ukraine. Now, the United States gives arms to Ukraine, which is fine because it doesn't really have a significant impact on our other goals. But initially, when that war started, people in the United States were talking about sending more support in the form of troops and things. So the foreign military intervention, which the United States does a lot of, and which China doesn't do at all, because they look at that and they're like, that seems like a lot of cost with very little benefit. But the United States continues to get sucked into these things, right? And so you do have to make decisions about what is important, what's not important. The United States, we are no longer in a position in which we can do everything. So you have to make strategic decisions. Our politics make that difficult, because if you always have to respond to whatever's happening today, and you get criticized for not responding, it's really hard and not so sexy to be like, I'm not going to do anything right now because I'm planning for 30 years from now, which is something the Chinese are able to do. So I'm constantly sort of asking, like, what are the US competitive advantages? How can we think about doing things differently? Because we're just doing more of the same things. And I don't think that's what's going to work to make us, competitive in the international system. So I definitely think there's something to learn from the Chinese in terms of efficiency in particular, and exercising power. I often tell the Chinese, though, that are focused on their rise, they never focus on how the United States has stayed powerful, right? So I always ask, how do you think the United States has stayed powerful this whole time? You always focus on how we became powerful. And they never really have a good answer. But the answer is restraint, right? It is a degree of restraint of exercising that power. So the question is, people ask, under Xi Jinping, have the Chinese gotten rid of that restraint? And is that going to be kind of their ultimate downfall? So they can learn from they've learned from some of our mistakes, but maybe not all of them.
Okay, we have the last question.
Hi, my name is Allegra, and my question is based on the Chinese international relation. In fact, do you think that Xi Jinping is continuing along the same political line as Deng Xiaoping, or like the China return to, in a sense, the block and the isolation of the past times with Mao Zedong? Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think that Xi Jinping is going back to what Mao is doing or did in terms of international relations, or the way Deng Xiaoping. It opened up with the policy of reform and opening, which is interesting because in order to reform yourself, you need to open up to diversity. And if you genuinely open up to diversity, you cannot but reform yourself. Mao Zedong and Xi Jinping, they have something in common in terms of the youth. They went through very harsh times, and Xi Jinping was living in a cave for a while when he was young, and the same things, hard times that Mao had. It's true that he is ideologically more strict, but again, during pandemic, when the big high-tech companies, they were fined in the name of that common prosperity value, that was a value already accepted and declared by Deng Xiaoping. So there is a continuity, because it's also about the legitimacy of power there. So you will never really see a strong turn. But on the other side, it's a way of putting, especially in this time with Xi Jinping, is a way of putting political power above any strong economic interest. In China, there is no such thing that the company is too big to fail. That happened with Evergreen. So you see that there is a political line that should be reaffirmed all the time. So in this way, it's more strict than before, because before there were times where you needed to be more flexible, because people need to build and grow and produce wealth. So that was the needed flexibility. That also, in terms of the way the party acted within the legal system, was exactly that. We don't really write very strict laws. We do one step at a time. It's the way of saying, if you cross the river, you cross stone by stones, and then when you put the foot, you do it by feeling the stone first, and then you put your your body weight on that. When you see that you are stable, you will hold on. And so the idea of experimenting at local levels and then grow up and then expand nationally. But Xi Jinping now is also creating a series of uncertainty, especially when it comes to succession of power and what will happen next, because in that kind of systems, when you don't have predictability, then that is part of the stability and certainty of the system. So there we definitely see a problem. And but I see quite, I will not really say that, you know, Xi Jinping is really just going back or bringing China back to Mao times. Many Chinese people will say that, also of, you know, but it's more about holding the country together in terms of those strategic decisions that should be made internationally. So that's more about that, yeah.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you so much. Oh, okay,
You're close?
Yes, I'm close. Thank you so much. I really want to thank our distinguished panelists for this interesting discussion about the relation between China and United States, and also the expertise and the knowledge in this field. I really appreciate how engaging was this discussion. So I let the discussion go even more than the timeline that was established, because you really raised really interesting question. And I really thank our panelists that decided to stay even after the time that was established. So thank you so much. Thank you for being present here. Thank you for the experience you delivered this afternoon. The event is closed, so now you can all return back to the other destination of the festival. This session is closed. Thank you.